Good evening, and welcome to the Burnsville Parks and Natural Resources Commission meeting for June 1st, 2015. The first item of business is to approve the agenda. Are there any items that commissioners would like to add to the agenda for this evening? Seeing none, motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
And second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? The motion is passed. The second item is for citizen comment. Is there anyone who would like to address the commission? Seeing none, we will move to the third item of business, which is the approval of minutes for the meeting of April 6th, 2015. Commissioners, is there anything you would like to add to the minutes for the previous meeting? Anything from the staff?
Nothing from staff.
Motion for approval?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And all opposed. Seeing none, the motion is passed. The fourth item of business this evening is to review the annual deer management report and propose strategies for 2015 and 2016. This review will be presented by Caleb Ashling, our resources technician.
All right, thank you, Commissioners. As Sarah mentioned, I'm here to report on the deer management program for this past year and also make recommendations for the upcoming year. This program runs a little different than the standard year, the program year. It runs from April 1st to March 31st of the following year, so that's what I'll be reporting on today. And just a little bit of a general overview of the deer management program started in 2001. It was intended to address the following items. So the first was negative impact of deer browse in natural areas. So high deer densities can cause low diversity in the plant community and also prevent forest regeneration in natural areas. Then it was also intended to address landscaping depredation by deer on private property and also deer car collisions. So the program has four components. There's an educational component, feeding ban or feeding ordinance, and then monitoring the deer population and also population control. And I'm going to cover all these components in this presentation. So for the education, the city maintains a website with information on the deer management program and also on other deer-related issues. We have a plant list that residents can use that typically deer don't prefer. We also have information on the deer feeding ordinance, why it's important not to feed deer in the city. And then we utilize the Burnsville Bulletin periodically to remind people about the deer feeding ordinance and why they shouldn't be feeding deer. And then on to feeding complaints. We received no feeding complaints in 2015. Typically we do receive one or two, so that was down a bit this year. And then the recommendation is to continue monitoring and sending out action letters as needed. And generally in the past, letters have been enough to get compliance from people who are feeding deer. And for the monitoring component of the program, there's three parts of that. The first is aerial counts conducted by city staff every winter. The second is monitoring forms that are available on the city website and at the city maintenance facility for residents to fill out if they have observations of deer or landscape depredation issues. And the third is collecting and reporting the number of car deer crashes in the city. So our aerial count this past year, or this past spring, was conducted on March 24th. There were 172 deer counted. And I'll show you how those numbers break down in the different management zones. First, I just wanted to let you see what those management zones are. On the north side of town, north of Highway 13, we have the northwest and northeast units. In the central portion of town, south of 13, north of 42 and 35E, the west central, east central, and then south of 42 and 35E, southwest and southeast. So this table shows the aerial survey information both from 2014 and 2015 with the corresponding management units. As you can see, the northwest unit, we had a lower count this past year by quite a bit. And the west central unit, we had a little bit of a higher count, 7 to 17. The southwest unit was about the same, 53 to 49. The northeast unit was down a bit, east central down a bit, and the southeast up a bit. And overall, the count was down from 216 in 2014 to 172 in 2015. And this map here shows the locations of the deer during the deer survey. So when staff goes up on the survey, we take a GPS unit and we take a location and also record how many deer we see at a point. So it's a little bit hard to see, but each circle represents an observation, and within that there's a number that represents the number of deer seen at that point. So you can see how the deer are distributed within the different management zones on this map. And then for the monitoring reports, we had 2 general observations reported and 2 depredation reports by citizens. We also do have some informal reports that come in when staff meets residents out in city parks, and they report deer issues at that time. So this map here shows where those reports came from, and the 4 reports came from the northeast unit. We did have some informal reports as well from the northeast, east central, and the southeast units. And then for the car crash data from this past program year, we had a total of 41 deer car crash incidences that were reported. This was compiled from city police information, state reports, and also Burnsville animal control reports of deer carcasses that they picked up. And that's up a little bit from past year. We had 32 collisions last year, but it's within the range that we've had in the past 5 years or so, and it's down from the numbers before the program and from the early years of the program. And this map here shows where those crashes occurred. And so you can see there's some more clusters this year in the west central unit, southwest unit, and also in the southeast unit around Alamagnet Park. So the staff recommendation is to continue these monitoring methods. They've been sufficient for us to track the deer population this past year. And then on to the population control aspect of the program. There's 3 components of that. The first is encouraging archery hunting on private property. There is a number of archery hunters in the southwest portion of the city where there's some larger parcels, and a few other areas in the city as well. And then we also have archery hunts on public land, and then we do sharpshooting with the Burnsville Police Department. So for the archery program, staff and the city encourages residents on private property to remove deer on their own property. And in 2013, the ordinance was amended to allow more archery hunting on private property. But currently, we don't have a way to track the number of residents that are archery hunting on their property or the number of deer removed. And then we also operate archery hunts on public land where possible. So the park where that's occurring currently, or this past program year, was Kelleher Park. There were 8 deer removed in 2015 through this hunt. And this hunt is organized through the Metro Bow Hunters Resource Base, which is an organization that helps cities and other groups organize suburban or urban population control deer hunts. And then another hunt was organized in Murphy Hanrahan Park, a small portion of which is in Burnsville. This hunt is organized by the Three Rivers Park District. There were 21 deer removed in this hunt, but for our purposes, we consider 2 of those removed in Burnsville because only about 2% of that, or 10% of that park is in Burnsville, so we extrapolate that number to get the 2 deer removed. And then for the sharpshooting program, we use the Burnsville Police Department sharpshooters for deer removals. And this past program year, there were 27 deer removed through this program. That was down from last year. Our removal was 47 from last year, but we also had some lower removal goals in some of the management units, and also we had a tough winter with lack of snow to do our sharpshooting. So this table here shows the harvest goals for this past program year and then the actual removals that occurred. So on the, we have the unit on the left side, the removal goals in the middle, and then the actual removals on the right. So for the northwest unit, we had a large removal goal, but we weren't able to conduct sharpshooting in that area this year, and that's been the same in past years as well. That area of town is pretty much all private property, and we don't have access to any sites to do sharpshooting at this time. But we're also not receiving a lot of car collision reports from that area or any landscape depredation reports from residents in that area. Then the west central unit, we had a removal goal, a range of 2 to 5 deer, and we removed 5 deer, so we're near the upper part of that goal. Then the southwest unit, there was a fairly high removal goal and 10 deer removed. In that part of town, we're using the archery program for removals, so we also have some potential removals through private resident archery hunting as well that we don't have a way of tracking. Then in the northeast unit, we had a goal of 17 to 38, and we were able to reach the minimum goal with a removal of 20. And then in the east central unit, we had a goal of up to 3, and we removed 2 there. And then in the southeast unit, the removal goal is very low, so we didn't conduct any sharpshooting there this year. And then for the recommendations for harvest in the 2015-2016 program year, we have the unit on the left side, the population goal after that. That population goal is based on a deer density of 15 to 25 deer per square mile of preferred deer habitat. And then we have the projected 2015 population. That takes our survey information from this past spring, factors in reproduction, and then also some mortality, and then comes up with the population for this upcoming fall. And then on the right side of that table is the recommended harvest. So you can see we have a high harvest goal for the northwest unit, but again, we don't anticipate being able to do sharpshooting there because of the lack of any access. In the west central unit, we have a higher number than previous years due to a high count in that area this past year, so removal goal is 17 to 20 deer. In the southwest unit, at 24 to 41, we'll again work with our archery program for control in that area. In the northeast unit and the east central unit, we have goals of 0 and then 18 in the northeast and potentially up to 4 in the east central. In those areas, we have received both formal and informal reports of deer landscape depredation and other issues, so we'll continue to shoot for the higher removal goals in those areas. And then the southeast unit, we had a goal of 9 to 12. So staff recommendation is to continue sharpshooting this winter within the northeast, east central, west central, and southeast units. And then we'll select the exact locations within these units based on deer distribution. And the staff recommendations are also to continue the Kelleher Park archery hunt with the Metro Bow Hunters Resource Base. That's in the southwest unit. And for this item, I'd like to get a motion from the commission to recommend these hunt dates to City Council. This is for the Kelleher Park archery hunt. We propose 4 hunt periods this year. This is similar to past years for this hunt. The dates would be, the proposed dates would be October 1st through 3rd, October 15th through 17th, October 29th through 31st, and November 12th through 14th. These are all Thursday through Saturday hunt dates. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Questions, Commissioner Bach?
So you mentioned how there's a high harvest target for the northwestern area, and not many were removed, and it's difficult to sharpshoot up there. Yep. But there's also very few crash reports, and so why is the target so high if it's not a problem to have the population in that area?
Well, we also are looking at forest regeneration issues, diversity on forested land for our plant community. And there's quite a bit of wooded habitat in that area. It's land that's on private property, which is why we don't have access to it. But the diversity of the plant community and tree regeneration is still a concern in that area, even though we aren't seeing some of those other issues.
Yes, Commissioner?
Why are we setting a target that we know we won't achieve?
I think we have our standard goals for each area based on the deer densities that I mentioned. And we may at some point be able to gain access. There are potential changes in the northwest unit coming in the years with redevelopment in that area, and we may in the future have access to those areas. So I think we set standards that we can compare from year to year, and we can work towards achieving some removals down the road if possible.
Is there any method to maybe move the deer population into a different area or try to remove them through some other program?
When the program was initiated in 2001 or prior to that, there was some research done on some of the different options for removals or different population control aspects, and it was determined that sharpshooting through or removals through hunting were the best and most cost-effective methods.
Once again?
What's done with the deer carcasses that are sharpshooted?
They are transported to a volunteer who processes them for donation, and then the meat is given to different food shelves and other nonprofit organizations.
Yes, Commissioner.
What is the impact on the Terrace Oaks Park since, the clearing? I've seen very few deer in that area. There used to be more. What do you project the population is going to be impacted by the clearing?
In general, when you clear out an area, they may temporarily move to a different location, though I did talk to the folks that did the clearing out there, and when they were getting rid of some of the buckthorn and other trees, they did say as they were stacking the trees and locations for removal, they had deer feeding off the piles while they had equipment working in the area. But some of the deer may temporarily move on while it's opened up because there's higher visibility for potential predators, and there's also a lot more people walking through that area to scare them out. But in the long term, I would anticipate that it would be a potential good feeding area for deer because there'll be a lot of tree regeneration, aspens, which is one of the preferred foods for deer. So I'd expect that there'll be deer coming into that area, which is another reason we'll have to monitor that area and consider potential population control if we want to make sure that we have some of our desired tree species coming back.
And the second part is, why are we bothering to kill 2 deer in that area? The cost of killing 2 deer seems to me, a couple $100 just to do that? Why don't we just let that alone, because there's so much change going on in that area anyway?
Yeah, in that unit we have a sharpshooting site that's very easy to access and get to, and so it's very cost efficient to get in there and do the removals. And then it's important to try to maintain the deer population. It gets harder if you don't get to areas and you let the population get really high to try to get it back under control.
For 2 deer, how much is it going to cost us to kill those 2 deer?
I don't have numbers for those exact deer because we compile it all together. Sure.
Hi, I'm Daryl Jacobson, the City Natural Resource Manager. Commissioner Nachman, to get your question, part of the program is also to kind of respond to high nuisance areas. So that's a location where we do get a lot of complaints. We do get, a lot of calls from residents. And as Caleb mentioned, whether we remove the deer there or another site, the cost is the same. The setup and stuff for that site's very easy. And so in order to be able to go in there and kind of maintain the population where there's not a lot of deer to remove is something that I think is easy to do. And it also shows the residents in that area that are complaining about the deer population that we are staying on top of it. We do the counts. We follow the plan. And so that's why we did it.
With all due respect, I understand what you're saying, but for 2 deer, why don't we just, and with all the change going on in that area, I would suggest maybe let that level until we see what the population is going to be this coming year.
I'd also like to, because that was my concern as well, was the cost per deer. Because when you talk about when you're getting written or verbal depredation complaints from residents, it's deer are eating landscape plants. Is that correct? They're eating their hostas and their tomatoes?
Yes.
Is that, okay. On the last, one of the last pages, page 9 of the annual report, it says that an additional 54 deer, and in addition to the minimum that harvest that that wants to be removed. An additional 54 deer could be removed if funding allows. It goes on to say the northeast, southeast, and east central management units shall be the focus for these additional removals beyond the minimum removal targets, as the city has received numerous verbal depredation complaints in these areas over the last year. 54 is a high number of deer. And if the number, if there, I mean, there is a cost per deer, if it's 200 or as much as $300, I think is a number I have heard before. That's $16,200 that we are spending because people's vegetables are being eaten out of their backyards. And if we really wanted to address that and be cost effective, I wonder if there's just other things we could do, like a vegetable and hosta reimbursement program or something for, if that's the real reason is that's why they're being removed. That's like the number one reason. I understand that the depredation can just simply be an indicator of high deer density, and they're so more likely to be deer car collisions in that area as well. But it's a large enough number that I think it needs to be really considered of what's the major reason that it's that those deer are continuing to be removed over the minimum, which I think addresses the concern over here as well.
Well, I think the main reason the deer are being removed is not because of the complaints that we're getting. City Council has set the goal, and they approved this plan at wanting the population between 15 and 25 deer per square mile of preferred deer habitat. So that's what's setting the removal goals. But we do have limited resources, as you mentioned, so we do not have enough money or time, basically, to look at the numbers that Caleb presented and set out to try to remove all those deer in 1 year. So when you're focusing your efforts, the priority areas are where people are experiencing that deer depredation. We are having high car deer collisions. So that's kind of a secondary factor when looking at how we're going to allocate those resources. And, doing a program where you would reimburse for plants or things like that is not getting at the root of the problem. Because if the deer population was still high, those hostas would get eaten every year. Same with the vegetable gardens, and you're just in a cycle of having to purchase those every single year, where eventually if you get the deer population down, hopefully those costs would go away or be decreased.
Okay. Do commissioners have anything extra? Yes.
Yeah, going back to the goal for the Northwest, I think it was, are we conveying that we're not meeting our expectations to the city by setting such a high goal? Or what I guess, what's the message that you guys are trying to convey by setting a high goal where you've obtained 0% of the target?
I think we're just trying to report on each unit fairly and accurately with the goals that we have for each area. Mm-hmm. And then it also gives us information that we can try to work with private landowners in that area. We've talked to some of the large landowners about how they can remove more deer, and there is some archery there, so we can work with them to see if we can encourage them and increase their efforts to do population control in that area.
Well, taken as a citizen, I look at that and I think, oh, there's too many deer in this area and the city's not doing anything about it, is the message that I get from those numbers. Is that what you're trying to convey?
That's not the intention. As I mentioned, we're just trying to report on what we've done in each area. And to not include that information wouldn't be really fair reporting on what we're trying to do with the program.
How are the targets set?
The targets are set based on our aerial survey, and then we do some population control equations for mortality and reproduction. Mm-hmm. And then we use our deer density goals of 15 to 25 deer per square mile of the preferred deer habitat within each zone, and then we get our final removal goals for each area based on that. So basically we have a population goal for each management unit, and we look at our aerial survey information, and we try to set our goals to get the deer population back down to the goal.
Okay. And did you have a slide about that, about how we're meeting that density goal, if we're over or under per?
Here's the slide for this upcoming year. on the population goal along with the recommended harvest. So this is for this upcoming season.
So, for example, does that mean that the deer population is exploding in the northwest section? And we currently don't have a good way to maintain control of that population?
No, I wouldn't say exploding. I would say it's at a high deer population or high deer density. There will be a point where the population can't continue to increase because of lack of food resources. So I think this shows that there's a high population. It may continue to go up through natural reproduction and lack of predators or other removal means. But I don't think I would consider exploding or something that's going to, in a couple of years turn into 100 or 200 deer.
Is there anything else that commissioners would like to question or comment?
Yeah, one other question.
Okay, please.
Is there concern with the additional 10 car crashes in the last season?
Yeah, there's always concern when there's car deer collisions, but that number is within the range of what we've been seeing at our general population, deer population that we've had, and it is down from past years. So as I mentioned, in 2001, I believe there was around 70 car collisions, and so in the early phases of the program, while the population was still being reduced and before the program existed, that was a more typical number. It was around 60 or 70 deer, so we're still a ways down from that. But we'd like to see that number lower, and we'll strive to work towards that.
Okay, and with that, if there's nothing to follow up from commissioners or staff?
Correct.
Staff recommends continuing this deer management program with no change to the current plan. Do I have a motion for approval?
Motion.
Motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay.
Commissioners, I believe that staff is also looking for approval on the 4 hunt dates. Is that correct? So that is part of your motion,
Okay.
just to make sure that that's included as part of your motion.
And as part of this motion, the 4 hunt dates mentioned. So we have still a motion for approval and a second here. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, seeing none, the motion is moved.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, Caleb, for presenting, and Daryl Jacobson, thank you as well. Moving on to the 5th item of the evening, we have a public hearing, a review for Burnsville Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program. And we have a special speaker for this as well.
Good evening, and thank you. My name is Ron Leaf with SCH. We'll be talking about the NPDS Phase 2 Stormwater Permit Program, really an overview of the 2014 annual report. And this is a required element of the program to have this annual public opportunity for comment. We've drafted an annual report, and that's been available at City Hall here, so any resident has the opportunity to take a look at that draft report and provide comments, and we'll get to that as we go through the presentation here. What I'm going to talk about is a quick background on the program overall, just the main elements of the program, which you as commissioners have probably seen if you've been on the commission here for the past few years. We'll talk specifically about some of the things in Burnsville's MS4 permit. We'll look at status of compliance for the city, highlight some things that the city has done in 2014, and then talk a few next steps. And then before we jump to questions, Daryl is going to jump up here and give a quick overview of the state of the lakes, just a report card on the lake water quality. So this National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program has been around. It was established through the Clean Water Act, and US EPA really initiated this program, and in the state of Minnesota, it's administered by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. The city of Burnsville was designated a a permittee and required general permit coverage dating back to 2003. That permit was revised in 2006, required the city to update some elements of the program, and then again that program was updated, and the permit was updated in 2013, and the city again had to update many things within the program, and I'll talk about some of the things that were done over the past year to meet that most recent permit issuance in 2013. So Burnsville's permit includes a SWIP, or Stormwater Pollution Prevention Program. It includes a number of minimum control measures. There's 6 of them, which each include 1 or more best management practices, and each of those best management practices includes a number of measurable goals. And as you can see here, in any good regulatory program with many acronyms, we'll go through that, and there's a few new ones this year that will come up in one of the later slides. So with Burnsville SWIP, roughly 37 best management practices, and so if you look at the measurable goals, you know, more than 100 probably measurable goals, things that individual staff need to track and accomplish on an annual basis. And then in addition, that 2014-2015 program update added some additional things that staff are just now ramping up on. So it's a program that's not going away, and at every 5-year cycle when the permit gets updated, additional requirements apply. These are the 6 minimum control measures. I'm not going to go through the list right now because we're going to talk about some highlights in each program in subsequent slides. So there's 6 plus some additional requirements, which include the impaired waters review process. So reviewing impaired waters is part of the permit requirement. It also relates to some extent to the lakes report that Darrell is going to give on the status of the lakes. So as far as the reporting process, in this year's a little different, this annual report, because in the past it's been a single permit that's been reported on. In this case, since that new permit was issued in 2013, the calendar year 2014 part of this permit really includes elements of the previous permit as well as some things that the city has already started to initiate activities on for the new permit, and I'll touch on that briefly. The new permit requirements were actually issued to the city, and the city obtained coverage on April 3rd, 2014, so those new requirements were required to be completed by April 3rd, 2015. Basically, the MPCA gave all the cities a year to update their program and demonstrate that, yep, we either are doing these things or have a plan in place to get these new requirements into our program. So that's what that April 3rd, 2015 date represents. And then in the annual report for 2014 that's due at the end of June, the MPCA asked some questions about where are you at with these new requirements? Did you update your program? So that's where it relates to old program plus reporting on some of the elements of the new program. Permit also requires basically a status of compliance, a self-check. And based on the review and the draft report that was compiled, the City of Burnsville has met the requirements of the 2014 permit year, and the city also has completed the required updates as the April 3rd, 2015 target date for those new elements. So the city's in good shape. The city's actually in great shape relative to, there's 240 some MS4 permittees in the state, including both cities, some counties. MnDOT is an MS4. So the city's in good shape with their program as a whole. Some cities are really just trying to ramp up, but the city's level of effort and staffing levels for the program as a whole have put them in very good shape. Talk a little bit about highlights from 2014 for each of these minimum control measures. First, the public education outreach participation. The city continues to do these lake management meetings with the various lake associations throughout the city, distributes stormwater literature throughout various events and meetings that the city holds, produces a water quality report, and that's sent to all residents as part of the city newsletter, I believe. And then the Adopt a Street program had 29 organizations participate in 2014. And as I look back at last year's report, I think there were somewhere more in the order of about 15 or 17. So this is a pretty big jump in that level of effort. And really important as it allows a lot of that debris, that trash and debris that would normally be potentially getting into the storm system, into the ponds and wetlands where these storm systems discharge. So it's a very important element of this stormwater program. Illicit discharge detection and elimination. The city on an annual basis updates all of their storm sewer systems. So in a new street reconstruction project area or a new development area where new storm systems go in, city staff will GPS survey those new systems and add it to a map that's updated. And that map is really used to help inspect all the outfalls on a regular basis and also to look at potential illicit discharge if they are reported. You know, where does that pipe come from? How can we track back to where that discharge may have come from? In 2014, there was one identified illicit discharge. It happened to be at a construction site, so it's maybe a little different than we typically would think about illicit discharges, which would be oil or paint or something like that. But a construction site can also be an illicit discharge. It's basically sediment that wasn't controlled on the site, and that got into the storm drain system, and MPCA was informed, inspected the site, and things were corrected. So it's an interesting example of illicit discharge that you don't often think of because it's from a construction site, which has its own permit requirements. Construction site stormwater management, there were 21 projects reviewed by staff as part of the development review process. During construction, 172 site inspections at those 27 projects. And of those 172 inspections, over 100 of them, those sites were found to have some non-compliant issue. So that may seem like a big number, but I think the important point there is that upon notifications, those site contractors took care of those issues on a very prompt basis. So your silt fence isn't working or your rock construction entrance isn't doing its job, take care of that. Those contractors took care of them promptly, and so that there weren't any significant issues that needed subsequent follow-up or real violations to be reported. Control Measure 5 deals with post-construction stormwater management, those things where actual physical practices are going in, new infrastructure like stormwater ponds. There were 2 underground detention systems constructed, 9 infiltration areas. When we say that, we mean rainwater gardens, biofiltration basins, any infiltration or volume control type practice. 3 sump manholes and 3 uses of porous pavements. So quite a mix of things, and I think that that shows that not only the developers and city projects are seeing these things, but there's also some reasons why we might see a wet pond versus an infiltration basin, and those things are sorted out through that development review process. So quite a good list of things, and all of these are also added to that citywide GPS, the GIS mapping, so that the city can maintain records and maintain an inventory of all these systems. Measure 6 is pollution prevention, good housekeeping for municipal operations. So this is really all about what city staff, city operations need to do themselves. So the city owns and operates this infrastructure and has to inspect the outfalls, the sump manholes, the ponds that it owns. And you can see there that 100% of the outfalls were inspected, 100% of the pollution control devices, and then about 75 of the ponds and sediment basins. So the ponds and sediment basins, the permit requirement is to inspect 100% over the 5-year permit term. So this represents about 20%, more than 20% of the ponds on an annual basis, or close to that. So this, we kind of keep track of, over that 5-year period, is this city going to inspect all 384 ponds? And the city is well on track to do that.
Oh, I'm sorry, we take a question here.
Quick question. When you say you inspect the ponds, what is inspected?
Sure. Commissioners, the inspection process for ponds and sediment basins initially involves a visual observation of the inlets and outlets to the pond to see are there debris accumulations, is the pond functioning well from an inflow and an outflow basis. That observation also includes, is there a sediment delta, for example? Do you see geese or ducks standing in an inch of water out 30 feet into the pond? So, hey, we know there's a sediment delta out there. That needs to get plugged into the pond cleanout program at some point in the future. So initially, it's that visual observation of the function of the basin. Is there a sediment delta? Are you seeing any indications of other maintenance that might need to be conducted, whether it's vegetation, trees growing in structures, things like that that just need to happen to maintain that function of the basin. So then in the spring and fall, the city does annual street sweeping, and in this case, 2,500 lane miles are swept annually. We track how many lane miles are swept and the volume of material that's removed from the street. So that's a pretty big number. I think, again, that's significantly higher than the volume of material that was removed in 2013. And all that material is material that ultimately may have gotten to those ponds, and in this case, it's removed before it is delivered to ponds and wetlands. So as far as next steps for the annual report process, just collect comments on the annual report by June 15th, and then that report needs to get finalized and submitted to MPCA by June 30th, 2015. And I mentioned this 2014 SWIP revisions. Really, the staff has started to implement these new permit requirements, and that's just a process that's going to unfold and continue over the next year as these new things start to ramp up. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the program elements, the highlights that maybe don't fit into a specific box but are significant projects that we wanted to highlight in 2014. The annual pond cleanout program, talk about, after that observation of ponds is done, then what happens? Well, the pond cleanout program looks at those highest priority pond areas and says we're going to do a pond cleanout, and about 10,000 cubic yards of material was removed from the 3 ponds in the McAndrews 35W area, and so that was a significant effort last year. Also developed plans for a couple of pond projects. Lady Bird Lane area pond, it's an existing dry pond, detention pond, provides some rate control but no treatment. So some construction plans were developed for those to provide more treatment, as well as to put a liner in it to protect the south sump in the Kramer Quarry where the surface water intake is. So those plans are ready for that pond, ready to be constructed here later in 2016 or 2015. And then the same for the Keller Lake Crystal Beach Park Pond. Those plans have been developed and ready to be constructed. City also completed some rehabilitation on some major storm sewer and lift station work in that McAndrews 35W area. And then really a significant effort this past year was this new permit requirements. And what ultimately came of that was this policy document with a long list of standard operating procedures and enforcement response procedures for each of the program elements. So it's really a guide manual for city staff to follow to implement the overall NPDS program. In the past, it's kind of been everybody knows what they need to do, but MPCA and their permit process said, you know what, we really need people to have and cities to have written documentation so that, for example, if there's staff turnover, somebody can pick up the manual and say, what do I need to do? So staff put a lot of effort into that to get that document ready, and it really provides a good overview of what staff are required to do in order to comply with this program. And then the annual pond cleanout program, as you've heard, it's looking at prioritizing a few of those 271 ponds that the city has, quite a few ponds. So I can't do them all. I need to prioritize based on the city also has this pond assessment tool, the SWAMP program, which helps kind of put some data behind what is the priority of each pond to be cleaned out. And then prior to a pond cleanout, the soils, the sediment in that pond are tested to determine the level of contaminants and, where can it be disposed of. And then the pond is cleaned out as part of an annual program. So the city's in the process of looking at, I don't know if the ponds for this year have been selected yet or not. I'm going to stop there. Daryl's going to talk state of the lakes, and then we'll be happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you. I think at this meeting last year, commissioners expressed an interest in getting a brief update on the state of the lakes as part of this MPDS annual report. So this water clarity report card is something that we do put in the annual report. It's also something that we send out kind of as a water quality report annually. Usually it goes out in September or the fall Burnsville Bulletin. And so the way we kind of measure our water clarity is we look at a 3-year average. There's a lot of factors that go into water clarity. A lot of them are, environmental, weather-based type things. And so just looking at 1 year is maybe not representative of how that lake's clarity actually is on an ongoing basis. And so we do a 3-year average, and there are goals there set for each of the priority water bodies that we have. I'll just talk briefly about each of them, maybe some projects that we're doing. First there on the list is Alamagnet. We've actually seen some pretty nice improvement in water clarity there, even though you look in the 3-year average is only 1 meter. The goal is 1.3, but just a few years ago, the 3-year average would have been about 0.5 or 0.6 meters on that lake. About half of the lakes in Apple Valley, so we work closely with them on projects. But we've done some watershed projects, such as putting in ponds and things upstream. Also done some work with our street reconstruction projects, and we did some in-lake stuff, trying to balance the fish population and things like that, so to keep that internal loading of phosphorus down. And we've seen a nice response from that, but it is still on the impaired waters list, and so we will have more projects in the future for that lake to try to increase that clarity even more. Crystal Lake, you can see the 3-year average is 2 meters. The goal is 2.1, so it's very close, and actually in 2014 it was exceeding the goal. That lake has also seen a nice increase in clarity since about 2005. There's been a lot of work done in that watershed, kind of when the Water Resource Management Plan first was approved in 2000, 2001, and so we've seen a nice improvement in water clarity there. Currently, we're doing things like harvesting for curleaf pondweed in that lake. Early Lake, again, very close to its goal. It's had, some very good years of water clarity. We also do some aquatic plant management on that lake currently to help with the internal loading of phosphorus. Keller Lake, as you can see, that lake is struggling a little bit. It's 3-year average is only 0.6 meters with a goal of 1.8. We do have, as Ron mentioned, the Keller Lake kind of Crystal Beach Park Pond project is being designed. It was originally going to be a pond, but now as we've gone through the design process, it's actually going to be an underground treatment facility in Crystal Beach Park. And so there's kind of a big open space on Crystal Lake Road East and Lac Lavon Drive. So there will be a disturbance there that's proposed for construction in 2016, but it will be underground, and so once the construction is done, the park will look basically how it does now with that turf area for people to use. But that project is estimated to remove about 75 pounds of phosphorus on an annual basis, and so that will be a big project for that lake, and we'll hopefully see an impact from that down the road. Lac Lavon used to be an old gravel mining area, so it's has very good water quality. It's exceeding its goal. Right now, we have some minor aquatic plant management that we're doing in that lake, but really nothing ongoing there. We also share that with Apple Valley. Sunset Pond, again, very good water quality there, exceeding its goal. We continue to monitor it, but we don't have any projects planned because it is doing well. South Twin Lake is, again, exceeding its goal. There, very good water quality last year. And Wood Pond, 1.3 meters on its 3-year average, a little bit short of its goal. We do have an underground infiltration project proposed there as part of a street reconstruction in 2016. And then there is also some work proposed in the future for dealing with some internal sediment loading that we do have in our CIP. So that's kind of a quick update on where the lakes are and some of the projects we've done or have planned in the future. I think, looking at these 3-year averages, most of the lakes are very close or exceeding their goals. The couple lakes that maybe have a ways to go, we do have some projects planned, and the city works closely with Black Dog Watershed, Vermilion River Watershed, and ultimately with the city of Apple Valley as well, because we do share 3 of the lakes on this list with them in how we manage them. So,
Thank you, Darrell. At this time, I believe we're opening up to questions for the public hearing.
That is correct, Chairman Kiefer. The Commission is asked to receive public comment and formulate their recommendation in regards to any changes or updates they would like to see made to the city's stormwater pollution program.
Okay, so I think both of our speakers are available to be present for any questions that citizens or commissioners have. So at this time, I would like to officially open the public hearing for the stormwater pollution prevention program for Burnsville. If there's anybody who would like to address the commission or speakers at this time, and if not, if there are any commissioners who would like to do the same, questions, comments.
I just have a question for Darrell. Darrell, can you tell me how the underground filtration system works versus the holding pond that is set for the beach area at Crystal Lake and Keller?
yeah, so a holding pond you're probably very familiar with. It's your typical stormwater pond where an area is excavated out and it has a certain amount of water that's stored in it all the time, and there's bounce for when water comes in, and it holds that water, sediment settles out before it goes downstream. The underground system works very similar to how that does. It's just there's chambers essentially so an area is excavated out, those chambers are put in to hold the water, and then there is earth put back over the top with, in this case it'd be turf grass then put on top of that. And then there's some access manholes throughout the structure to be able to get in and perform maintenance on it. In this particular case, there's an existing storm sewer line going into Keller Lake, but because that line is so deep underground, in order to build a pond with the side slopes that are required, you won't be able to get the treatment that you want because you'd have to dig the pond very deep and take up a large area of land to do that. And there's also groundwater issues there, so you can't build the pond down into the groundwater, you start losing your efficiency. So through all the analysis that we did, having this underground chamber is the best option to be able to provide that treatment. Essentially, water will be directed from the existing storm sewer pipe into these underground chambers where the sediments and things will settle out before the water then continues on downstream. So it kind of functions in the same way as a pond. It's just a different design and a little bit different structures used.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Other comments, questions, concerns? I do have a question about the rain gardens. You mentioned that there are 9 infiltration areas, which includes rain gardens and bioinfiltration units, I think. I'm wondering if there's ever been any consideration into doing neighborhood, either in city streets or in neighborhoods, doing the curb cutout into like the yard and having 1 or 2 meter square little basins for catching water.
Yes, we've had 2 of those projects in the city. One's on Rushmore Drive, the other's on Southwind Drive in the Keller Lake watershed. And so Those projects are good, but because Burnsville is essentially already developed, what we've found is the neighborhoods where those type of projects are kind of cost efficient are limited, because you have a lot of utility issues that you run into in that first 15 feet of doing a curb cut and having the garden behind it. If you have to move those utilities, they get very expensive, and then these regional treatment areas become a lot more cost effective on a cost per pound of phosphorus removal. Also, the slope from the street up to the home is a big factor. If it's too steep, then all those rain gardens have to have retaining walls, and those retaining walls get expensive. People have existing landscaping that they maybe do or do not want to get rid of. And so we've evaluated a lot of areas. We did find a couple where it worked. But unfortunately, there's not as many areas as you would think where kind of those large-scale projects would work. And putting in only 1 or 2 gardens on a street really isn't cost-effective to mobilize the equipment and do that. So you need to have an area where you can put in 15 or 20, in a small area to get the cost where it's kind of competing or manageable with some of the other practices that we have.
But in the event of systematic repaving and moving utilities, because it's happening in my neighborhood, if it makes sense, it's still something you guys might consider for water quality issues?
Yes, we have actually, in Al Magnet's watershed, we did a street reconstruction project, I think 2 years ago, and we had stormwater money allocated to that project to do stormwater improvements. Now, on that one, it ended up being another underground infiltration area in the right-of-way that the project went in. And so we do, especially in areas where we have impaired waters and are not meeting our water quality goals, we are starting to put money into those projects dedicated to stormwater management. But a lot of times when you look at those sites, the rain gardens don't end up being the most cost-effective tool, but we are putting in stormwater management as part of those projects.
Mm-hmm. There's another benefit, of course, in doing something, especially if it's above ground and in a public area, is because it is so visible, even if it doesn't seem cost-effective from the actual function of it. Just the visibility and education is probably more effective than flyers when people see those kinds of systems.
Yes, I agree. And the city has a lot of rain gardens that we have put in, we have them at our maintenance center. We have them, Wood Pond has a big one out there, and we have them in our parks. But a lot of times on these street reconstruction projects, the cost is not even close. On the, you might be able, with the rain gardens, just for example, maybe it's $100,000 to remove 8 pounds of phosphorus, where you do the underground thing, maybe it's $150,000 to get, 30 pounds or something like that. And so, but certainly, we do have a lot of rain gardens in the city, and we do have them as part of street reconstruction projects, but also with our limited resources, we are trying to get the most bang for our buck, and sometimes the rain garden doesn't end up being it.
Okay. That actually leads, thank you for answering those questions, because it leads into my next question, which is just more of a curiosity. I know for a number of years Burnsville has had the Blue Thumb with grants and homeowners building rain gardens. I'm wondering if that's on any of your maps, if those are being tracked in any way or measured in any way, and how effective they have been.
We do have maps that show where they've been put in through the grant program. We don't use that as part of this NPDES reporting system because it's not treating city stormwater. I mean, basically 100% of those gardens are treating roof runoff that starts on the property and ends on the property. So it's not necessarily part of our storm sewer conveyance system, but we do try to take credit for those when we're looking at the lake goals outside of the NPDES permit. And there is, I think the SWCD does have some numbers on what those individual projects are removing is on an annual basis for phosphorus. And a lot of those folks get signs, so there's a lot of public education associated with those. And there has been a lot of them put in, over the last 4 or 5 years. So we do monitor them, we know where they are. But in this aspect, the city doesn't do the maintenance on them and that type of thing, and so they're not listed on that map.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments from citizens or commissioners? Seeing none, I think that will wrap up the formal public hearing on the Burnsville Storm and Water Prevention Program, Pollution Prevention Program. Thank you.
Daryl, we're looking for a recommendation to...
Oh, well, yes, thank you for speaking. Yeah, and we are looking for a recommendation, are we? We are receiving public comment, and we would like to formulate a recommendation for any changes or updates that we'd like to see made to the review, and I don't think there were any changes, so do I have a motion to recommend the draft as is?
So moved.
We have a motion to approve. We have a second to approve. Do we have all in favor of approving this review? All opposed? Okay, the motion is passed.
Commissioners, I would also like to point out that residents or people in the community can make comments to Ryan Peterson, the city engineer. Information can be found on the city's website on how to reach him as well, up until June 15th.
Thank you, speakers, for your time and your presentations. It brings us to our sixth item of the evening, which is miscellaneous, and we have an item for that.
Yes, Commissioners, in your miscellaneous packet, Parks and Recreation Director Terry Schultz provided you with an update on our Loch Levon project. You can refer to your notes for that information. I've also added information on an upcoming commissioner training that will be held on June 22nd, right here in the council chambers at City Hall. Many of you have already been through that training, but sometimes it's a good refresher if you wish to attend. Please let me know so that we can get an accurate head count for that event. The agenda is also posted in your information. Our next PNRC meeting is on July 6th. I know that's a difficult date, but we do have a project review that is coming before you, so if you can make it, please be here. It's tough after a long holiday weekend, but July 6th will be our next meeting. And then the last bit of sad news that I have for you is that just prior to the start of the meeting, Commissioner Bach informed me that this is his last meeting as a Parks and Natural Resources Commissioner. He will not be returning with us for the next year, as he's off to college, and he's been a great student representative. So thank you to David for his service to this community. Thank you, David.
Thank you, David. Thanks. That brings us to the final agenda item, which is to adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
The motion is passed. That brings us to an end of the meeting. Thank you again for attending and watching the Burnsville Parks and Natural Resources Commission meeting.